Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another segment of Youth Perspectives. Today we are going to talk about a really interesting topic because it affects a lot of us, and at one point in our life we were probably guilty of this, or unfortunately some of us still are, or if we're not, we know someone who is. And that topic today is backbiting, slandering, gossiping, and judging other people. So today we have, for the second time, Gazina as our guest.
Assalamu
alaikum. We're so happy to have you here, Gazina, and we're just going to talk a little bit about what backbiting is, because many people do get confused between the difference, like backbiting and slandering. And then we're going to talk about why people backbite. We're going to talk about some solutions to the issue as well. Then we will move on to talk about, judging other people, because it is something that all of us, to some extent, are guilty of doing at some point in our lives. So first, we're going to talk about backbiting, and we're just going to establish what exactly backbiting is. So Gazina, can you tell us, in your own words, what do you think backbiting is?
I think it's essentially when people decide to expose or talk about secrets or private things about other people that the person who's being talked about wouldn't really want other people knowing, or stuff like that. Just overall violating another person's privacy and saying things that maybe portray them in a negative light or just harm their reputation as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. And reputation comes into play a lot because, as Muslims, we're supposed to protect, the reputation of our brother or sister in Islam. So I'm going to say a hadith. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that ghibat is remembering your brother in a way he dislikes. So a lot of us, sometimes we think that as long as it's the truth, it's not considered backbiting. However, that's the exact definition of backbiting. Backbiting is when you say something, but it is the honest truth. It's a fact about, this so-and-so person. For example, if Gazina does something, if she pretends she eats so much chocolate cake and it's so unhealthy and she doesn't want anyone to know, but I know that she eats it and it's a fact, and I go tell someone else, oh my god, did you see how much that girl was eating? It's the truth, but she didn't want anyone to know because now they're going to think of her as some unhealthy person. So that in itself is backbiting, even though it's the truth. However, when you're lying and you're saying something about someone, if I say, wow, Gazina had the whole cake, that was a lie. If I stretch the story and I lie, that goes a step further, and that's not backbiting, that's slander, which is even worse, and it's so sinful, and we're going to discuss the consequences as well. But just to establish, that's the difference between backbiting and slandering. Backbiting is when you are saying the truth, and slandering is when you are actually lying about the person. And another hadith, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, ghibat is exposing that aspect of your brother which Allah had concealed. So this is very important to remember, that whenever we sin or whenever we do something that we're not proud of, we're lucky that Allah doesn't really expose our sins to other people. So imagine if someone else finds that about us and goes and exposes us to the outside world. Imagine how we would feel. So that's why we should be very careful to not do that to other people as well, because it is a major sin. So just to establish that, please be careful, even if it's the truth. If it's something that you know for a fact the person would not like being exposed, it's better to stay away from saying it. And then we're going to discuss, Gazina, why do you think people backbite and slander? Because unfortunately, it is a really big issue, especially with our age, the teenagers, what's going on with that?
I feel like there's two main reasons. The first one being that a lot of people think that it's sort of like a competition, especially in our society, that if you're for girls especially, if you're a young girl in society, you're competing against the other girls, and so it's letting down others or saying lies or even the truth about them that they wouldn't want anyone to know decreases their value and raises your own in comparison, just like that. And so I think that's really problematic when people think of our existence in society as some sort of race or competition, because it's not, right? We're there in Islam, we're there to help each other, and we're as a community against the outside world, but the way we think of it, it's we're competing against ourselves, right? And that's very problematic. But the second reason, apart from just the competition kind of mentality, I think the other reason is that it's just, I feel like when people are insecure about themselves, they think that it's okay to let out their insecurity on others and to judge and let out their anger or whatever emotions they're feeling towards someone else through their words. And I think that's really, it is super problematic, because when you're talking to someone else and you're saying these things about them, you're promoting some sort of like this sort of culture of letting down one another. And then when you go and complain to other people that like, oh, our society judges us so much and they're so harsh and they do this and that and they aren't accepting, well, you're contributing to it just by saying those 2 or 3 words that are letting down someone else. You're promoting that as being part of it. So
yeah. That's actually a really good point, Gazina. I didn't think of it in that way, that if people backbite, in a way they are kind of showing how insecure they are about their own selves. Because if you're really confident with who you are, you won't feel the need to put someone else down or bring them down.
Because like how do they affect you? Like you can help them, you can help yourself and get better, but how does their existence like hurt you in any way?
Yeah, exactly. You know, like, it's really, really, and we hear that bullying as well, right? If someone's rude to you, it's not really your issue. It's something that's wrong with their own self. So you're so right about the whole insecurity thing, and how sometimes as a society we feel like we're in this like competition and we all have to be like the best, and the only way to succeed is to pull other people down. Yeah. But in reality, you know, if we really want to succeed, we can like bring other people up with ourselves, and we can both excel together. So some other reasons why I feel like people always backbite and slander, unfortunately, is because first and foremost, it's really tempting, to be honest, because I feel like as humans we are naturally inclined to want to know the most about other people, and we want to know like the juicy like details that has something to do with our brain, the secrets. We want to know things that no one else knows, right? And it kind of like it kind of like draws our attention, and we want to know, oh my god, I thought that person was so perfect, but do you have some information about them that says otherwise? You know, we always want to know like the next latest thing. And just I feel like as humans we're naturally programmed to want to have that, which is why we have to be extra careful, because it's naturally something that we're inclined to do. So it is, you know, obviously an issue, but also another reason why I think that people backbite is because they want to boost their own self-esteem. So like Gazina mentioned, if people are insecure and if they feel like they are lacking in some way, they feel like if we put other people down, I will make people think that I'm better than that person I'm backbiting about. So then, you know, for some reason they feel like their self-esteem will be boosted because, you know, the other person's in the wrong and they're not. So that's a very, very twisted, you know, version of trying to boost your self-esteem, but unfortunately that's some tactic that other people use as well. For example, if I am insecure about myself and I see Gazina doing something, and if I bring her down, then people are going to be like, oh wow, okay, Gazina's not that great of a person, so I guess Azra is, because Azra doesn't do that thing at all. You know, so I think that's a really, really sad way of looking at it, but some people do that. And lastly, I feel like a major reason that people backbite and slander is because there's a lot of jealousy and envy that exists within our community, just within the world, because you know, we're always comparing ourselves. It goes back into the whole thing Gazina said about like life being some sort of competition, where we always feel like we have to compete. We always feel like it's a race, and we have to like, you know, always be like ahead of everyone else. And if someone has something that we don't, if someone has a blessing or a quality, a characteristic, a trait, something that we don't have, we feel very jealous. We feel like we feel really envious, and then we feel like we have to bring them down in order to make ourselves feel better because we do not have what they have. But it's a really sad cycle, because once you start backbiting, you become so used to doing it that it just becomes your normal, and then it's such a great sin. And if you normalize backbiting in your life, it's really, really hard to come out of that. So we will discuss some ways to kind of get out of that cycle if unfortunately you are someone who is stuck in it. But which is a great transition to our next point, because we're going to talk about the consequences of backbiting, and that's the first step into into coming out of that cycle, to really understand why is backbiting so wrong. Why in Islam is it always mentioned that you have to be very careful when protecting the reputation of your brother or sister in Islam. We're going to talk about that as well. So Gazina, do you know any consequences or any issues that come with backbiting?
Mm-hmm. So on a personal scale, of course, when you do backbite, you have to understand that you're sort of, as I said earlier, endorsing that mentality that letting others down is okay, right? And when you do start to judge others and just think of the negatives about them, when you first look at someone, you don't see the positive in them, but you see everything that you can talk about later, or things that you don't like about them, because you want to destroy that image of them being perfect in your eyes. You bring that onto yourself too, right? When you look at yourself, you don't see the positives anymore. You see yourself from the eyes of others. So if you're looking at someone and you say, oh my God, you see all like the deficiencies in them, see what's wrong with their appearance, everything else. When you see yourself, you're going to think that everyone else around you judges you like you judge them, right? So when you look in the mirror, you won't see everything good about you that maybe someone next to you would see that. You instead see everything bad about you that, oh, well, if I see that in someone else, they must see in me too, right? And that means you have low self-esteem, right? You don't look at yourself positively. You're not thankful for what you have because you've been looking at everyone else in that way that Islam doesn't recommend, right? Apart from that, you have to realize that when you do talk bad about others, almost every single time it reaches their ears too, right? And when you do that, you're hurting the feelings of another person in your community, right? You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what problems they're going through, like if they're giving up on life, or if they're, feeling like it's not worth it, or they're just very like discouraged from participating, and your words could push them to just leave the society altogether, right? And then after that, if they have no one else to go to and they start to stray from the right path, it's all you're responsible for it, along with the other people who've discouraged them from, actively participating and trying to become better people. So I think that like societal, like just in terms of like, yourself and society, gossiping and slandering have huge impacts on like everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that's one point I did want to mention, because at the end of the day, we feel like backbiting is something that's so secretive because we do it behind closed doors. But at the end of the day, it's very likely that what you say will reach the person, and they will be, tremendously affected. And we have no idea what they're going through. We don't know how our words, how our actions may have consequences on their own life. For example, if someone pretend someone's going for a job interview and I go and backbite to that person about that person, and word reaches to the hiring manager, then that might cost that person to get their job, and I was responsible for that. And that's like a very specific example, but even on a smaller scale, our words, like, we have this bubble of influence. So whatever we say or do, whether we like it or not, does have this influence. It affects other people as well. It's a domino effect. So if we say something, it will like change the minds of other people, and then in turn, God forbid, if they go and spread that to other people, you can start rumors, you can start gossip.
Yeah.
And what's really, really scary is that the thing is, if you backbite, you think that you're saying facts, right? Because remember, backbiting is the truth. But the moment you kind of get a little really excited about telling other people's stories, you're going to start adding your own opinions to it. And then that starts becoming a lie. And then when you add your opinions to that facts, it becomes this twisted version of reality. And then if people, God forbid, go and tell other people what happened with their own opinions, it's just going to like spiral into this huge rumor. And it's really going to like just almost destroy the reputation of the victim, which is really terrible. And at the end of the day, whatever you think you're gaining out of backbiting, you're really losing a lot more than you thought you would have gained. So that's one thing to really remember, that there's so many consequences just with that one victim. That victim's going to suffer so much. But when it comes to your own self, if that person finds out hearing about it, imagine how hurt that person would feel. And if that person was close to you or had any space in your life, he or she will not be your friend anymore. You can lose friends that way. You can break off ties. You can end relationships that way with people who are close to you, like your friends or even your family members. So that's really, really sad, because Islamically we're supposed to be so close to one another, and we cannot be strong if we are always constantly putting each other down. So additionally, I'm going to mention an actual Islamic verse in the Quran about ghibat, or backbiting. The Quran states that, nor let some of you backbite others. Does one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? So this is in Surah Hujurat, Surah 49, Ayah 12. So this ayah actually describes the condition of a backbiter in the afterlife, because it is as if you were actually biting the flesh of your brother or sister in Islam. So one tradition concerning Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that on the night of Miraj, I saw some people in hell who were eating dead meat. I asked Angel Jibreel who those people were. And then Angel Jibreel replied, they used to eat human flesh in their worldly life. That is, they used to backbite about other people. So we hear about this, that backbiting is literally, I mean, in hell, that's what you're going to be doing. It's as if you were biting the flesh of your brother, and thus the name backbiting, because you are tearing someone down. So just to understand these consequences, it is enough to like make you understand that you really have to stop backbiting if you are guilty of that, because you are not only affecting the victim, you are affecting other people, because if they become involved in that whole, backbiting situation, they're going to have the sin as well. And you're going to have most of the sin because you started it all. So there's just no good. So whatever you think you're going to, benefit from backbiting, it's really not worth it.
Also, to make it a little bit more like, realistic, like I know that a lot of people normally when they're thinking of consequences and they're like, oh, well, it's the hereafter, right? It doesn't seem as like legitimate. But like about your like job interview example, also like just in terms of your normal daily life, right? I know that a lot of like mothers and daughters, and just for women in general, like a huge part of their life is getting married and etc. And you need to realize that one day your daughter, or if you're a mother, your daughter, and if you are the daughter, then you will be faced with all the rumors that others have made about you, and others will be faced with the rumors you've made about them. Right? So you have to understand that, okay, sure, job interviews is a little bit more of like, career-oriented example, but if you apply that same example to your own life, that through a stage maybe you've already passed or you will pass in the future, it really, it affects you, right? Something someone said about you, because they decided gossiping was a good idea at that moment, maybe because it was a good conversation starter or it was like a really good topic that was interesting, right? But the thing is that what they said could be like drastically like exaggerated to the point that one day when you're sitting there, you could hear of that rumor and it's so out of proportion now, and everyone's judged your reputation, who you are, and all the actions you've done to this point are just discarded. They're thrown away because those rumors someone else made about you. And the same thing for what you say about someone else, right? You gossiping, or even worse, slandering, is just so horrible because you're saying something about someone that they never did. Or if they did, God is telling you to keep that in private, right? Because their honor and their izzat matters so much. Yet you just throw it away like that, and it sort of like destroys all their hard work, like for a majority of their life, just for that one topic you wanted to have with your friend, one conversation, right? So it has so many more impacts apart from just from like, when you're saying that word or you're saying something about someone, just realize the extent of the harms that you're going to do if you say those words. So just rethink it before you do say it.
Yeah, definitely, because you would never know how far your words will reach, because you have no idea like who's going to go and say what to the other person. Exactly. It's going to blow out of proportion and to the point where you can't even stop it, and it all started with you. So at the end of the day, you're responsible for that, and you would not want the burden of that on your shoulders at the end of the day. You really would not. So Gazina, what are some common ways that in our society people backbite? There are lots of ways, but what have you seen?
An endless list. Well, I'm guilty of this too, obviously, right? But it could just be something as small as like, you're talking to your friend, or you're on a call or texting or whatever you're doing, and you just mention like for example, if my friend's absent or they weren't at an event and something interesting happened, of course I'll reiterate, and I won't be saying it in like a negative light, right? But when I look back, I'm like, the person who was involved, would they want me to reiterate what happened, or would they want me to like just sort of brush over it like it never did, right? So like just telling your friends what happened that day, or like any interesting things that happened when someone asks you like, oh, how was your day or whatever, keep that, like, carefully say whatever you want to say. But then apart from that, it's obviously like you just go to like a dinner party, or you go anywhere, or you're at some event, right, and someone's wearing something that's a little bit like iffy, or maybe their hairstyle is a little weird, or their hijab style or whatever, and you decide to just comment on that, right, or just lightly like touch on like, oh, those are some interesting clothes. You're not saying they're bad, but you're still obviously expressing some like sort of discontent with it. And then you'll strike up a conversation about that maybe you didn't intend to strike up, but your comment started it, right? So it can just be small little like sentences, just a phrase, or just some sort of like face expression that can like trigger some sort of conversation that you're responsible for.
Yeah, definitely. Even with the facial expressions, like for
Yeah.
example, I've also heard like if someone is standing, right? For example, Gazina's standing here and someone else is there, and I just like make like a mean gesture, like or
Yeah,
facial
you
expression
just
towards
raise your
Gazina.
eyebrows or something.
Yeah, literally, if you are still implying some negativity towards that person when they cannot see you, you are still guilty of backbiting because that's still a
Yeah,
sin.
and the other person who's like receiving or like seeing you do that gesture is probably going to do a gesture back. So that's like a conversation on its own.
You're having a whole like nonverbal conversation behind that person's back, and poor them, they have no idea what's going on. So that's true, because sometimes like obviously also when I'm like talking about what happened in my day, obviously people are involved in our lives whether we like it or not, and obviously people's names come into stories, and then I always have to stop myself and I have to tell myself, oh my god, would that person have wanted me to say that? Because again, I remember Prophet Muhammad said in the hadith that ghibat is remembering your brother in a way he dislikes. So it's very it's a fine line, because maybe I think it's not something that I would dislike if it was said about me, but that person does not think it's something that they want said about them. So we have to be very, very careful, and I think over time with practice you get kind of better at it. But definitely stories is one thing. Like when we're just telling stories like, oh my god, what happened in my day, this person did this person did that, we kind of get carried away with our emotions, our opinions, and we tend to maybe accidentally backbite when we didn't mean to. If that happens, obviously do repent, because you didn't have like pure like evil intentions, you were just talking about yourself. But if you catch yourself, immediately stop and then go repent, obviously. And I think another reason that people backbite a lot, and this is a actually very, I wouldn't say valid reason, but it's understandable why. But backbiting still a sin. But if someone is rude to you, right? If someone treats you in a wrong way, you feel like your backbiting about them is justified, because you feel like that person is terrible and everyone should know. Because in society, we do have people who, unfortunately, from your perspective, they're not the best people, but maybe everyone else thinks they are, right? There's everyone in society like that, like, not, I wouldn't say two-faced, but like in public they're like really great, but there's something else. But they're like that in private, so you're so tempted to actually kind of like expose that person, because you feel like, oh my god, that person doesn't deserve all the positive all the appreciation and all, like, the positive things people say about them. That person doesn't deserve that. But who are we, right, to judge? So we don't know what happens behind closed doors, what like that person does. Maybe that person takes care of his or her parents while you don't. Maybe that person prays namaz al-shab while you don't. So you never really know what that person's going through. Maybe that person's going through a phase in their life, so maybe they treated you wrong based on the circumstances, so you never know. But if someone treats you wrong, it is like really tempting to obviously shut that person down, destroy that person's reputation. But you have to know that at the end of the day, if Allah chooses to conceal someone's sins or conceal someone's faults, then that's Allah's that's Allah's will, that's Allah's decision. And who are you to kind of go out and expose someone when Allah Himself decided to protect that? So that's almost like we're kind of what's it called? We're challenging Allah's decision, which is so wrong. So if something is concealed, keep it that way. So with that being said, we've talked about why like backbiting is an issue, and obviously we're all guilty of it at some point. But now that we've established what it is and why it happens so much, Gazina, what do you think are some practical steps that we all can take to kind of stop backbiting?
First thing, I think you need to think before you talk, right? And it's really hard, especially if you talk fast and don't normally think, right? Like if you have close friends, obviously when you're talking, you're not gonna like double think everything you say and like cautiously continue, because you have no reason for to be scared. Like they're not gonna judge you, and everything else. But the thing is, when you're saying something about someone, or you're about to gossip or slander, in the back of your mind that like, oh, this is something that I really want to tell my friend, right? This is something interesting that happened, or oh my god, how could they do this to me? That it's something that's a little bit iffy, right? And when you do, you need to rethink what you're about to say, right? And if you still think that it's something that's okay or it needs to be said, go ahead and say it. But before you say anything, think through it. Another thing I think is that you need to create an environment with your friends so that they know that you're not okay with gossiping or slandering or anything, right? So for example, if you're sitting with your friends and they happen to bring something up about someone, or they're all like bashing the person, like how could they do that to you, oh my god, what's wrong with him or her, you need to definitely like just flat up be like, I don't think that person is that bad of a person. maybe they have reasons for doing this, and say other things like that, right? And when you say that, the other person automatically understands that you're trying to like support them and that you don't appreciate what they're saying. And when you say that, the next time they try to say something bad, they'll double think it before they say it, because they know you won't take it, you know, so nicely or as enthusiastically as they like hoped. So I think it's really important to create like that sort of environment with your friends, because of course they know you best, right? And if you can subtly let them know, of course you don't have to flat up be like, I don't appreciate that and you don't need to say that kind of stuff to me again, because that's going to harm your relationship with your friends. But if they truly understand you, they'll understand whenever you're not comfortable with something they're saying.
Yeah, definitely, Gazina. That is a good point, because at the end of the day, even if we're not backbiting, if someone else backbites and we encourage them, we're guilty of the sin as well. So actually that was a point that I wanted to make as well. If someone else is backbiting, there are several things we can do. If we truly are close with them and we know they're going to understand us, then just be open with them. Say, hey, I don't really want to talk about this. Or if you're their friend and you really care about them, obviously just tell them straight up, hey, you know, this is backbiting, this is not right. We shouldn't really be talking about this person behind their back. So the first step you can do is just stop that person like straight up. But if unfortunately you cannot, because there are many situations where you're not comfortable with that person, or that person's older than you, so you don't want to be disrespectful, right? You know, because like, you know how aunties have the tendency to gossip a lot, and you're just like young and you can't really tell them what to do. So just walk away from the conversation, you know, just kind of end it, be like, okay, just end it and just, you know, leave as soon as you can. If you can't leave, then do not do anything to encourage them. So even if you like widen your eyes, or you're like, oh, really? I did. Like if you encourage them, then you yourself are guilty, because you're kind of really encouraging them to continue to do what they're doing. So never motivate them. So and if there is no way out of that conversation, just stay like very neutral in that conversation and just hate it in your heart, because I heard that as well. If there is no way out, if you can't openly tell the person to stop, if you cannot walk away, just hate it in your heart, know it's wrong, and maybe even try to say good things about that person who's being backbited about, right? So if someone says, wow, Gazina is terrible, I'd be like, no, I've met her and she's a very wonderful person. So try to kind of maybe defend that person, and in that way you're not disrespecting the person who was talking to you, and you're also defending the person who is the victim. So that's a really great point, that you can always kind of defend the people who are being victims to backbiting. But if we ourselves are guilty of it, some practical steps we can take to stop is, number one, to think before we speak, because I myself am a very fast talker, so I have to kind of think, okay, they're like, slow down and think about this when it concerns other people. But another great thing is to really just focus on your own self, because if we're busy backbiting, we're always looking at other people before our own selves, and we may not realize that we're guilty of the very things we blame others for, you know, we blame others for doing or thinking or saying. So we have to really understand that at the end of the day, what we do, where we are in our relationship with Allah, that affects where we're going to be when we die. So we have to focus on our own strengths, and we have to really focus on our own weaknesses as well. So if we think that someone else is lacking in some way, maybe we're lacking in 10 other ways that we're not even paying attention to, because we're so busy focusing on them, right? So us backbiting is not going to change the person. We should focus on our own weaknesses and focus on improving ourselves. And again, I read this somewhere, and this is very, very hard to do, but this is a very interesting point. If you have the urge to backbite about someone, the first thing you should do is speak good about them when they're not there. And I've done this before. There was actually this one person who I wasn't very fond of. We got off on the wrong foot, right? So she was a great person, but things happen and you don't love everyone, right? So I wasn't really fond of her when I first met her, but everyone else loved her. So I obviously, when everyone said good things about her, I was like, okay, I don't know who she is. Like, to me, she's not so great. But then I kind of forced myself to think of her in a good way, and I said, you know what, if you think about it, she has this one good quality. And then I went and I kind of told that to other people, and then it became easy, and I thought, I guess she does have some good qualities. And then when I thought of her in that way, I was like, well, I guess she's not that terrible after all. And then kind of I would meet her more, and I embraced her with a more positive attitude, and now we're very close. And she is a great person. So we just got off on the wrong foot, but I think that really helped me. So if you ever feel like you have the urge to backbite and say bad about someone, go against your nafs, because our nafs has to be trained like an animal. We have to train it. So force your nafs to say something good about the person, and you never know, you might end up actually changing the way you think about that person entirely. So with that being said, I want to end this backbiting discussion by naming a few situations where backbiting is allowed, because obviously sometimes we have to kind of expose other people for certain reasons. So one reason is when you're being oppressed. So if someone is oppressing you and you want to go and obviously speak out against that person, then obviously you are allowed to backbite because that person is oppressing your rights. And another time you're allowed to backbite is when you're taking advice. So for example, if I'm about to enter a deal with Gazina, and then I go to, someone and I say, oh, hey, I'm about to enter a deal with Gazina. It's going to be really great. But that person knows, oh, Gazina is not trustworthy. She is trustworthy, but pretend she wasn't, right? So they'll be like, oh, I don't think you should because it's not, I don't think it's going to be a good idea. So then they're allowed to. And obviously the one we all know when it comes to marriage, when someone asks you and approaches you about someone else, you have to be honest because the marriage is like spending the rest of your life with someone. So if someone comes and asks about Gazina, I have to tell everything I know about Gazina, which thank God is all good things. But, if she had something, I would have to say because it would affect the marriage as a whole.
That's why it's also problematic because imagine if you said a couple of things that were wrong, but let's say I say it to you, right? And you trust me a lot and I tell you, oh my God, that other person has this happened and that happened. And if I was saying the truth, first of all, it shouldn't have gotten out because maybe it's a mistake. But second thing, if I'm slandering or if I exaggerated the truth, right? And you take it for truth because I'm me and you trust me, right? So when someone else comes to you about that girl or that guy, whoever it is, and it's like, how is this person? And now you're like, oh, I have to say everything that I know. And what if that stuff is based off of wrong notes? Or let's say that you heard parts of a conversation or you saw it for yourself, but you didn't see the full story and you're making assumptions and you relay that, right? That's why it hurts someone's reputation so much because what you say or what you convey to someone else, they could take for truth and they say it to someone else. And it is their responsibility to say the truth in that time, in that moment, but their truth could be based off of assumptions that weren't correct. You get what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's why it's so it's very hard to navigate in, but everyone's actions influence and impact others.
Yeah, it's a whole domino effect. And there have been countless times where I have heard things about people that I was so sure was not true. And then you go and you find out it was just a rumor.
Yeah. Or it was entirely the situation was just the entire opposite. But somehow it just when it came to you, the news, it's just so different.
Yeah, for example, the game Telephone, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's real life telephone.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, you missed out on your childhood if you never played that game, but it's a game where everyone sits in a circle and I say one word, Gazina is a girl. Okay, and then it just keeps going and the person keeps whispering it to the next person and it gets so people keep mishearing things and they keep saying the wrong thing until when it reaches the last person, the person says something entirely different.
Yeah, the name isn't even the same.
Yeah,
anymore,
pigs can fly. And that's not even what I started with, but it just gets so twisted the more people you pass it on to. So with backbiting, it's very scary because it's not a game. It affects real people. Real consequences, exist. You are affecting your own, soul, your own afterlife. And literally, it's very scary because if you don't control yourself, it can just, accelerate into this really, really bad cycle. And it's just, there's no way out,
And then also, imagine the people that you're saying such negative things to about someone else, they're judging you too, right? If you can say something bad about someone else, why can't you say about the person you're talking to? And they know that, right? And then also, for example, when I think of my friends, and let's say my mom or anyone asked me oh yeah, they just mentioned someone and I'm like, oh, she's so sweet, right? And from the bottom of my heart, I genuinely feel like she's a great person. And then when I look back at it, I'm like, why? And then I think and I'm like, I cannot recall one moment where she ever said something bad about someone. And that really touches me at the heart because I feel like I can actually trust someone who doesn't say bad about other people, right? But someone else who gossips for just their our normal conversations, I'd be on guard around her because if she can do that about others, she can do it about me too, right? What connection do I have with her that won't break in the future or something like that?
That's a great point.
It's really scary.
Because what you say kind of reflects on people's opinions of your own self. So if, for example, if I was someone who backbited a lot, why would anyone trust me? Because if I expose other people's faults, then if I find out something about, someone else, who knows what if I'm going to say their faults to someone else
or
as well.
Or you're best friends with someone and then you just, fade away with time and now they know everything about you and they're okay with telling
and
others.
unfortunately, I know a circumstance where that did happen. There were two friends, they were very, very close, and then they weren't, and one of them came and started telling me a bunch of bad things about the other friend, and I said, I thought you guys were best friends. What happened?
Yeah.
I don't want to be involved in that. It was very scary, and it's so hard, because I think the hardest thing about backbiting is that sometimes people come to you and they want to like confide in you, or they really want to like, they want your approval, and sometimes you really can't give it to them, because if you kind of agree with them, you're encouraging it.
And at the same time, you're kind of dying inside to know what's so bad, but you need to suppress that, because
I know.
if you find out,
Yeah, there's so many times when people were like, they were starting to say a story and it was getting so interesting, but I had to stop and be like, wait, I want to know, but I can't. Like, I really cannot, it's just really sad and really scary, because at the end of the day, it's just impossible to tell how far your words will go. So I'm going to mention some traditions about, he with some more traditions. There's one in the Makasibul Muharrama, which says, one who moves from his place with the intentions of backbiting about his brother in faith, you should know that he has taken the first step towards hell. And then there's another one from the same book. Even if the backbiter repents, he will be the last to enter paradise, and the one who dies without repenting will be the first in hell. So it's very, very scary if you think about it, because even if you repent, you'll be the last person to enter paradise, which means that like whatever you do after that, it's kind of worthless, because you really are guilty of that sin. Because the thing with other sins is that, and this Maulana explained it once, and he said it in a very beautiful way. When you commit a sin, for example, if you don't wake up for Fajr, or if you disrespect just one person, it's between either you and Allah, or just between you and the other person, right? So if I don't pray, that's just between me and Allah. Or if I say something mean to Gazina, it's just between me and her. But if I go behind her back and I say something to other people, not only does it affect my relationship with Allah, not only does it affect my relationship with her, but it literally affects her entire reputation, and we have no idea how far that is going to go.
How far they would reach in everything.
Yeah, literally, and it can have so many consequences, like for marriage, or for job interviews, or for so many things. If someone's new to the community, and it's very sad, because
or just like respect, like how much respect you have in the community. You don't know, like I would think, oh, everyone, like my actions have paid off and people respect me for how much I put in, but they could be laughing behind my back because they're judging me based off things they heard from others that I don't even know about yet to this point, right? And that's why I just remembered, I think it's really important that if you do hear something about someone that you're like surprised, or for example, you didn't realize, but you let the story continue when your friend was telling you, right? And you heard it and you're like surprised because you don't think it's true, or even if you think it has a tinge of like truth to it, I think it's really important to go and confront the person who it's about and tell them that this is what's being said about them, because before you believe anything, and I know when you hear something, you slowly, like, you start to think about it. No matter how much you try to push it out of your mind, you'll still think about it. It's entered your brain now, right? But I think it's important to go to the person so you can figure out what actually happened and let them know that there's people behind their back who they maybe trust that are saying things like this about them, so they can clarify the situation, know, and not be judged behind their back for something they don't even know about yet. So I think it's better for them to know and be able to deal with it and not trust the same people again and make the same mistakes, Yeah,
especially for rumors, that's an issue, because they go around so fast. And at the end of the day, even if we don't have the information, it's our job to find out the truth, especially if something bad is being said about our brother and sister in Islam. And it's our responsibility as Muslims to defend that person. And I think that with backbiting, that's the hardest thing, because a lot of the times rumors have a sense of falsehood to them because of all the opinionated statements that are being thrown around, to the point where it's just far from the truth. But with backbiting, if people are literally just stating facts, it is the truth, so it becomes very hard to defend the victim, because it is true.
Or maybe that it is, but you can't But I think a lot of people in our community, I think that's also a big problem, but everyone takes one portion of that statement and they're like, it's your responsibility to find out the truth. And they'll go out and make it their mission to figure out, confronting random people, talking to others about it. Did you know what happened? Is this true? Blah, blah, blah. And you make the situation worse, because now you're only completing half of it, right? You're finding out the truth, but you're not defending the person. You're just finding out the truth because you want to know what actually happened. And that's not where it comes from. It shouldn't stem from your like sense of curiosity or wanting to know what really went down between someone and someone else. It should be because you feel this like innate desire to want to help that person because they are your like fellow brother or sister, right? You need to help them and clear up their reputation. That's why you should be going around trying to figure out or confronting the other person, not because you just want to know what the latest gossip is, like the actual version.
Yeah, and especially if like a rumor is going around or if backbiting is taking place, like the best thing is to just go to that person and just ask them. Maybe you don't have to tell them they're being backbited about. Just be like, hey, I was just wondering because I heard, so because if you go around and start telling other people, then they're gonna be like, oh, really?
And then
they're gonna
start, and then next thing you know, you just made it like
you just
spread
made it
even
worse,
faster.
right? Yeah. So if you hear something, like stop at that in there, tell that person, hey, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if we should be going around saying that, and then go and tell the victim like, hey, just wondering, what's up, like what's the real deal.
And that's like if you're close to them, etc. Because sometimes if you like with your band of friends, you're like, we need to figure out what actually happened. You make it into a very big deal, right? Because then it becomes like a new sort of like drama where everyone goes to confront the person. So it should be very like casual, but also kind of worried about the person you're talking to. And figure out what happened by talking to the person who's actually dealing with it so that they can, you can help them, but just remember you're not finding out what's happening or you're not confronting the person just because you want to be the actual source of like the information for all your other friends. Like, oh, I know what actually happened. Let me tell you. That just makes it worse.
Yeah, right? Definitely. It's like the worst thing to like involve other people in this matter because you're just bringing more people into this drama and that's not even necessary. Yeah. So I really think the best thing to do is to, if you're not close with that person, right? Like Gazina said, if you're close, you can obviously stop them, right? If it's your friend, you can be like, hey, first of all, where did you hear that? Second of all, on what basis are you saying that? Because I don't think that's true. But if it's someone who's saying something and you're not really close to them, and if it is true, if someone is telling you a fact about someone else and it's still backbiting and you're not close enough to tell that person to stop, do what I said to do, right? Like that one example where I gave, just try your best to maybe be like, oh, really? I don't think that person would do that. Or give them excuses, right? Because in Islam, we have to give our brother and sister, some traditions say 40, some say 70 different excuses. So be like, oh, maybe she was just having a bad day. First of all, I don't think she did that, but even if she did, she's probably having a bad day. She's still a great person. And try to defend that person and to and encourage other people to see the best in her or him. Because at the end of the day, if we just agree with what is being said, then we're contributing to that negativity. But if we stop a rumor, if we stop this like line of like gossiping or backbiting and we say, hey, no, that victim, there's some good things about her that I want to share, then you can actually spread, positive rumors. Well, a rumor is not positive, but you can spread a positive chain of like, events that
just like praise sort of thing.
Yeah, praise.
But I think, I feel like it's really problematic when whenever people say something about someone else, a rumor, and then they say, don't tell anyone I said it. So then by the end of the chain, you know the rumor, but you don't know who's responsible for it because no one's owning up to what they said, right? Or let's say I hear it from a close friend. So it hasn't gone through a list of people yet, but my close friend tells me something about someone else, and they say, don't tell anyone. But then don't you have a responsibility to go to the person and tell them what's going on or what's being said? Because you can't just let that stuff spread, right? But then at the same time, you may feel some sort of like loyalty to the friend who told you. And that's when you need to rethink, like, is this a friend I should feel loyalty to? If they really don't have any shame in telling me something like that about someone that they don't even want them to know that they told, right? Like I say something about Azra, I don't want anyone knowing that I said that about Azra, yet I'm saying it, right? I'm betraying her trust. So is it bad of whoever I tell to go ahead and confront Azra? Is it? Because, they're doing a good to Azra, right? Like, she deserves better than the sort of friends that break her trust like that.
Yeah, definitely. And like Gazina mentioned, it's always a reflection of your own self. So if you're going around backbiting on other people, your own the way people trust you is affected, your own honor and respect is affected, and no one's going to want to be close to you anymore because who knows, the day you're not close to them, you might go and just, expose their matters.
So I think it's really important if you're feeling guilty that like, someone trusted me with this secret about someone else, I can't tell anyone. Well, why did they trust you with that secret, first of all? And how do you even know that secret's true? You need to go and confront the person who the secret's about and deal with the situation there, because that secret could be affecting your perception of that person. And that in itself is a bad thing, right? It's not okay. And it gets so much more muddled in our sort of like communities where it's so common. Like someone will be like, don't tell anyone I said this, but blank, blank, blank. Right? And you not telling anyone or not telling the person who it's about, you're just letting it like you're believing that it's true in a sense by not addressing the problem. You just let it sit in your head and affect your thoughts and what you think about that person.
Yeah, definitely. And this is just such an extensive topic, and unfortunately we are out of time for today, and we wanted to really talk about judging other people, but we can definitely talk about that at a later time, because judging others is like a whole nother topic.
Yeah,
it's a whole different topic. You tie that with arrogance and everything. But just, Gazina, to close this, do you have any closing remarks or last thoughts on the matter?
I think I've said everything.
You said everything? Yeah, definitely. Like, there's so many things to say, but I do want to conclude with just two more hadith. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that ghibat affects the religion of a person faster than leprosy spreads in the human body. And Imam Jafar Sadiq ﷺ said that ghibat is haram for all Muslims, and there is no doubt that ghibat destroys good deeds like fire destroys wood. So we've mentioned so many consequences of backbiting of ghibat, but there are so many other things like like going to hell or just it destroying your relationship with Allah. So that's very scary. And at the end of the day, know that if someone's reputation is on the line, as a Muslim, it is your responsibility to defend them. Because if you are going after defending other people, Allah will defend your reputation. He will conceal your weaknesses as well. But if you go out there, kind of exposing other people's sins, what guarantee do you have that Allah will not expose your own? So really, really be careful about that. And just at the end of the day, stay united and defend other people when they're not there, because that's when they need you the most, when they're not there.
Yeah.
So with that being said, thank you very much for watching this session. We hope you learned something, and inshallah we will see you next time on Youth Perspectives. Khuda Hafiz.